we'll get started. So, what would you like to say it? We never actually said who was going to start off talking.
No.
But this is about 50 minutes of fun between Kayla and myself. We called this Power Up D365 Processes with the Power Platform. So, let's see. Okay, big, huge thanks to Bonar, as the main sponsor for this, and an extra thanks for them to having a pink logo. It's definitely made the day. And to the other sponsors, of course, Microsoft D365 Saturdays and European Collaboration Summit. And also keep an eye out for all of the prizes. There's some pretty wicked prizes. Hopefully they're also in pink. And if you can get them by going to, I think, the virtual event. And if you stick around to the end, there's the Collab 365, which has some pretty funky prizes as well. They are in pink. Thomas has just confirmed that some of them are pink.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's worthwhile going to talk to them just for that.
Yeah. I think because we're presenters that we should also get some, just because we've made our entire presentation pink. So we'll just put that out there.
Yeah, pretty much. Rightio. So about us, I'm Julia. I'm a senior functional consultant for a partner. You can reach me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we have the lovely Kaila. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a partner technical architect and work at Microsoft. So really, I tend to, Twitter's my unprofessional LinkedIn. So if you ever want to laugh, have a look at Twitter. And if you want to know about cool events, really anything to do with finance and operations, Power Platform, and some customer engagement stuff, there's a lot of events that I run that are free for Microsoft and training and things like that. So it's a really good place to just be able to have a look and see what's going on. So feel free to reach out. Both Julie and I always tend to try and respond to anyone who has crazy queries. So feel free to touch us up on either of those.
Very much so. Okay, so a quick run through what we're going to try and talk about today. So we'll go quickly over the technology, although, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna brutalize your name, or Aurelian. No, I'm sorry, mate. Our wonderful previous presenter has helped and done an amazing thing on the different technologies that we have. But we really wanted to build upon what the fantastic work that he did. And we're going to talk about then, okay, so we know what can be done. Let's talk about getting this into your real life business. So how you can identify gaps, how you can build on from gaps, how you can start building the app, how you can govern, and how you can share the app as well. So we're going to try and build upon from that. So this is our the Power Platform, wonderful little, lovely, colorful, pretty little logos that we now have. And within finance and operations, we do have options as well to customize and modify. And these are the real tools that are going to help you build out your apps. So you need to get a good understanding of what they are and how they work. The first one we didn't really touch upon last time, and that's using custom fields. Now, custom fields are both a blessing and a curse, mostly because they are a personalization, and that's the curse part. The blessing part is that they can be added to data entities, and data entities is really how we start to expose information into apps. Our lovely Orion did a fantastic job about business events and business actions. It was really quite fascinating in how they can be used, mostly within Flow. So they're really cool, and using them within the Power Platform really gives you that ability to customize it. And then finally, data entities. Now, data entities, I suppose anyone that has a sort of little technical understanding will kind of know what data entities are. But for those who are even non-techie, I'm an accountant myself, so having to learn this was hard. But moving over to data entities, it's kind of like a table or an Excel spreadsheet if you want to go down there. I'm sorry, I've said the E word. But they're a nice little way of grouping it all together. Anything you want to add from this slide, Kaila, or we move on? No?
Nope.
Cool. Radio. So gaps. Radio. Based on my experience and Kayla's experience as well, we've kind of said that a gap has kind of fallen into one of four categories. Oh no, my animations didn't work. Oh, Sorry, guys, this is going to appear up one by one by one. So you're just going to have to work with me and pretend here. So the first one that we have is really around business process flow gaps, which are, they come up. We also have industry gaps as well. So between the two, maybe you've got a gap that's specific to your business. Oh, actually, I'm going to go through them all in a moment. We also have business requirements and then complaints about functionality. So we're going to break out and look at each of these types of different gaps over the next couple of slides. We're going to talk about them, have a bit of a chat as well, and we'll kind of, go from there. Maybe do some we'll definitely do some demos because you always need a break from PowerPoint. And we'll move on from there. So, okay, process flow gaps. So what I count as a process flow gap is kind of along the ways, if you divide finance and operations into like procure to pay, or, it's as a whole little process. Now, most of the time within finance and operations, we get the end result, especially if you're an accountant. We do get that end sort of result. But before that end result, so for example, the invoice being raised within finance and operation, there's a whole massive process beforehand. And sometimes that process is done via paper. Sometimes that process is done by maybe a legacy system or different disparate systems that don't really connect to each other. And so if we have a look at this sort of sample process that we have within an app for, we can then talk about how we can bring in the Power Platform to help out with that. So, for example, we have an inspection that happens every 90 days. And so what we can do, we can have alerts set up within finance and operations if we do have that project within finance and operations. Or we can also then, maybe we can use Power Automate to create that reminder to send off that email to create the checklist that the person needs to do. So the next step is where the facility manager goes onto the site and runs through that checklist. So rather than them having a piece of paper or a Word document where they tick off the elements and write up all the different elements, we could use a model-driven app on that sense. So the model-driven app can be then used to complete that checklist. The facility manager needs to fix anything. I mean, we can't, unfortunately, we don't have robots yet to do that sort of stuff, but we are getting pretty close. But then once everything's been fixed, then we have to create that invoice for those fixed items. Again, we can use Power Automate to do that information, and we can use Canvas apps again to view what that information from within the different systems. So depending on who you are or where you're at, we can kind of tailor the solution and make it a little bit more integrated so that the guys that are using finance and operations can see the full process, and the guys that don't need to have access to finance and operations can also have an electronic process to keep all their information in the one sort of place. So I thought I would jump into into a bit of a show and tell on this element. Rightio. So here is another lovely little example of a model-driven app. It's not a hugely complex app. It's just got all of our projects, and we have down the side over here like the inspection status. So this is, again, we've got a flow that automatically comes around and updates, not that one, and changes the status to due and creates our checklist. If I go into the app itself, here we do have the checklist. Again, this is all model-driven app. We're using two entities here, one for the project information and one for the question information. And from here, the guys can just go through and they can pass and they can fail it, whatever they want to. And this works really well on a tablet as well. It can also be used on a mobile phone as well. Now, the nice thing, we have business rules in here as well, so that the minute they say that they fixed a problem, they have to say how many units they replaced. The reason why we're making people say how many units that they replace is because that's going to then fill on our final flow. So here we're getting a flow, and essentially what the flow is doing is whenever the record has been assigned. So our last step, if we go to the again here, once the whole process has been completed, we'll just move on, next page. Oh no, the computer's frozen. That's always fantastic. Rightio. So we'll just skip that part. Once the record has been saved and it's been fully invoiced, or they say that they're ready to invoice, we're going to get the information and we're going to use that information to create our sales order. And from there, we're going to then also add on the sales order line information and then update the system back. So the people who are in the projects, they can see all of this information. They can see when it was last invoiced. And then the people that within finance and operations, they can see the actual responses that people are doing to these questions through a use of an embedded app. It's just a nice little way of keeping things together, which really does talk to us about how, yes, we have finance and operations, but maybe the whole process before or maybe the process afterwards, we can use to bring everything together with Power Platform. Rightio. So industry gaps. I think I'll just flip over to Kaila. You wanted to talk about industries and ISVs.
Yeah, so when we talk about industry gaps, and it's something that we wanted to pick up really, is about how the solution's evolving from even when it was back in AX days, for example, and now to where we are with 365, where we are with the Power Platform. So as we've gone through strategically to lock down the models and, stop these hefty customizations using X++, now with some of the data integration functionality that we've got going in, which we are going into in more detail further through the slide deck, it's about understanding when you're having a look at these industry gaps, when you want to build an ISV solution or a solution for a customer that may be larger part of the system and application. So you might want to, I don't know, for example, make a housing solution or something like that.
Something retail specific as well. There's a lot of retail gaps and ISVs out there that we can fulfill and help out with.
Yeah, and it's about thinking about it different now, because as consultants, it's so easy for us to always be, looking into X++ for extensions, but it's talking about with these industry gaps, using the Power Platform to now start facilitating and managing those. The use case should be looked at initially to go and move to the Power Platform and how you can actually use that and to try and move away from these legacy mindsets, really, I suppose, of just customizing the system, because it means that you can fill those needs, even those larger needs, with the Power Platform. It's not just a business process enhancer. You can actually use this to create new functionality that you need in your application to make sure that it fits and aligns to an industry. And also it helps you create a repeatable and manageable ALM solution that you can even have across multiple customers, to make sure that rollout happens.
Yeah, very much so. So we have industry gaps, we have business process gaps, and they're really your big sort of gaps, and they're fantastic and really what the Power Platform can add a lot of value to. But we also have stuff that is a requirement. So as a functional consultant, I often sit down with the clients and we go through, we list out all the different requirements. And you can often hear a requirement, you think, oh, that doesn't quite work like that. I understand 100% your logic why you want stuff like that, but it doesn't. So here are some examples of requirements that we have had and the apps that we've built. So for this one, validated VAT number, this is a nice simple one that anyone within the EU should be very well aware of, particularly if you're finance related. But essentially, every time you create a new customer or supplier, you need to be validating that VAT name number against the EU database. And so, of course, our customers often think, well, it should be able to do that. That's just a normal legal requirement, but it doesn't. This is where we can bring in a Power App to do that information, because fortunately there are a whole bunch of APIs out there that we can use. So I'll jump in a tiny little demo this one. Oh, we've had the refresh. Okay, so here we are on our customers page and we need to validate this VAT number. So we're going to go into our little Power App button. We're just going to check on that VAT number. All this is doing now is just looking into one of those custom APIs. Now it's doing it actually via Flow and pulling back the results, which allows the person to check. We can 100% enhance that, maybe have the name being checked against the name, because as you can see here, the two details don't check. The VAT number is valid, but the information doesn't match up. So we can maybe start to enhance this by doing that, or email out the information so that we have an audit traceability of it all. So with that, what I want to say is, when does the process need to be triggered? Think about when that process needs to be triggered, and does what you need to validate that information against have information or have an API that we can use? Another example is to be able to calculate rebate information on invoiced orders. So again, a nice, simple little order, nice little simple requirement, really. Often people won't give rebates out to clients until after we've fully invoiced them. And if any of you guys have used the functionality, you know that's just not how this functionality works. So what we can do is we, again, have a little button somewhere, maybe embed it where the users are going to use it. So if that means we're going, and I've got a slide talk about this in my, but does that, and then what is the information that we need for this process? So are we looking at like a restriction of sales order lines? Are we looking, and can we access those sales order lines? Do we need to do sort of approval? And we can start to filter around and say, okay, well, we need something to trigger off the calculation thing. So we can just essentially use a flow button. We need to grab all our invoice information, and then we need to create maybe another invoice or maybe another, or just a debit note or a credit note from there. So all of these functionalities have data entities within finance and operations. So yes, we can automate that process because all the information that we need is there within D365, is accessible within D365 through your data entities, and all we need to do is just use a flow to pull them together. Another one, again, approvals. Often there's times, again, it's getting a lot better with every release that we get within finance and operations, but there are sites within finance and operations, you have a requirement that I want to be able to approve this element as I create it. I want to be able to approve an item or have it go through a workflow as I create it, or an asset as it gets created. I want some sort of workflow behind it. Now, the system doesn't have the standard workflow elements for that, but that's where we can start to use that one small little requirement, or relatively small little requirement. We can expose that information and we can work with it through the Power Platform. Anyone who's not using the Power Platform or particularly Flow and wants to start using Flow with D365, you can use it. It's an amazing thing to enhance your workflow emails. There's some really cool D365 finance and operation templates within Flow or Power Automate that will allow you to send off email and do approvals in an email. So rather than clicking on a link to go into finance and operations to approve that purchase order or that sales order or whatever, that journal, you can do it all within an email. And that's the power of Power Automate. Really quite fun to use and really, really simple to set up. You can set it up in about 5 minutes. Another example is creating a price journal based on a set matrix. This is very much for the retailers out there who have like a set price matrix that says like 50 pounds equals 60 euros or something like that. You don't want it to be changing based on your currency exchange rates. So that's really, individual requirements. So again, small little statements, which we can then start to use and access and work with us within the Power Platform. And these could all possibly have been gaps in previous things, but we don't have to have them as gaps because the users are often within the system, often accessing the system, so they have the right license or relevant, they have access to the system as well. Okay, the final type of gaps that I often see are complaints. So this is where you will show a user a system and you love the system, it's an amazing system, and then you get a complaints. So for example, here's another little one. I can't see which vendors don't have emails. So when you're doing a payment proposal within the AP module, and you need to email all your vendors, but you don't know which vendor hasn't got an email set up correctly, we can use Power Platform to access that information. So again, going to jump into a little bit of a demo here. Supplier payment. So here we have a payment journal. Within that payment journal, maybe you have 3 lines. I mean, 3 lines is very manageable, but maybe you have 500 lines or 100. My payment journals I usually see around 150 lines mark. So you have a whole bunch of lines, and being able to go through each of those lines to see which vendors have emails, it's just a little bit tedious and just quite frankly just really ain't gonna work. So that's why we can use Power Platform, because within a Power Platform we can embed our app and we can feed that journal information into our Canvas app. Once we've got that journal information in our Canvas app, we can then get all of the lines and the vendor information. So if you know how the linking works, so for journals, we then have the lines. That's a nice, easy one to connect to. And from the lines, we can pull out the vendor account. And from the vendor account, we go to the vendor name. For anyone that's in the system and they right-click on the view details, that's a really nice way. If you do that, to drill down into the relevant information, you can pull up that information And you can make those connections very, very easily. Rightio, so what we have here is journal number. We click on validate, and what that's doing is it's just looking at the vendor number for each of the lines and pulling up a little table for us that says these are the vendors that don't have emails. Okay, again, you don't like how many journals. So another complaint is they don't like the mouse clicks that they have to create. This one came about because of intercompany processes and having to do intercompany bank transfers. But again, often is the case, particularly with finance, they really don't like all the mouse clicks that you have to do. And that's where we can start to look at Power Platform to create those sort of information for us. Yes, we can maybe need to do some custom actions within Flow to actually finish the process, but you can get all the manual churning and the creation working. There's a fantastic blogger out there called Ludwig who does amazing blogs around how to use Power Automate to create journals, which is really quite a lot of fun. It just minimizes the number of mouse clicks. And this is just, we're trying to integrate the Power Platform within finance and operations so that the user gets a seamless sort of experience that makes them happy. Again, Power Platform really, really useful to minimize data entry. So minimize duplication of data. If a user has to do it in one system or in another, yes, there probably should be integration. But if stepping aside from there, sorry, Kaila, if we try to think about how we need to enter the information, and if they're complaining about they have to enter it in the purchase order form and in the vendor form, we can think about how to easily make that a bit simpler with the Power Platform. Again, this is related to mouse clicks, so reprinting information. They have to go into one format to reprint and another form to reprint, or they have to do too many mouse clicks. Really, that's what it is. And that's where we can use the Power Platform to help the user reduce our sort of mouse clicks. Another one that I often get is I've entered this data, and you may have entered it in a different subledger compared to this ledger that you're in or the subledger that you're in. And a lot of people, the users, they don't understand why they can't access that. I can explain from a technical point of view why you can't access that, but they don't understand that and they don't get that. And this is where we can then start to help with the Power Platform because the information is there. Let's just give them an ability to see that in the view, in the system and the tool that they're in. All right, I have done a lot of talking. Kaila, building out the app. So when it comes to the decisions you need to make, integration, Kayla's going to run over the next session, the next little bit, and that's really, really hugely important. I've often found integration very much so. How we interact with the app as well, like what system is the user in? What do they often live in? A lot of the times with finance and operations, the users don't, particularly if you're not a finance person, you're not in finance and operations all the time, but you may be in Teams all the time, or you may be in CE all the time. So think about where is that user most likely living if they live on their phone, and we can work with that with our building. What are the main elements that you need to do for your proof of concept? So what is your minimal viable product in that situation, and what is your key goal? And then how are you going to share it and how are you going to make it secure? Because, we can't just live in a perfect little world where we can do everything. We do need to lock it down. And that comes down to governance as well. All right, my darling, your time to talk.
Yeah. So we'll let Julia have a little bit of a break. The first point is for anyone who's used the Power Platform or not connectors. I mean, there literally is no reason that you should be able to ever suggest that you can't use the Power Platform. The standard connectors there are in the thousands, and every single Microsoft-based and non-Microsoft-based product that anyone really has any reason to care about, there is a standard connector there for it. And even if there isn't a standard connector there for it, you also then have the ability to create custom connectors, within your licensing models. So there is absolutely zero rationale or reason from any perspective that you should struggle to get your data into this application. The only difference is that from a finance and operations perspective, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the specific options that you have. Right. So first, when it comes to a bit more of an architectural side of it, depending on the version of the application you're on, and ultimately when your customer takes on this journey, you might only have the data integrator available to you. And if you do have that and you're about to go on this journey, please upgrade first, because from a licensing perspective, it's really, really, really important. Just to put it out on the table, if you're using Data Integrator, your finance and operations licenses do not allow you access natively to the Power Platform, because it's only classed as within the remit of the licensing if you use dual write, which is the new reborn version of Data Integrator. That's, to be honest, a little bit, more load bearing, lots less buggy, and lots less overhead to manage it. With dual write, what you do then have is the ability within your licensing agreement. And yes, I am, unfortunately, the one who has to answer these questions quite often. As a full user, which a lot of people, whether they're using the core functions in finance, the administrative functions, whether that's in commerce, finance, supply chain, you literally have full access to the Power Platform. You can build and run custom apps. You can build and run anything on the Power Platform within your finance, supply chain or commerce license. So get dual write set up. It's up to you whether you want to do it to the same environment as CE or you want to do it to a dedicated CDS environment. And once you get that set up, you can then start to select which data entities you want to feed across. Then, as Julie's really trying to
cancelling it out. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, but it does.
The other option that you do have is virtual entities. And as was being mentioned in the last session, these are a bit newer to the table, but it's meaning that you wouldn't necessarily have to have that data into CDS, because when you go on to the common data service, anyone who knows Power Platform, you have your capacity, your storage, your API limits. So at the moment, there is no clear differentiation of if the dual write entities are going to impact your API limits. So you should only send the data that you want to send because you want to use it into the common data service. Virtual entities are the reborn version of not having to worry about that, because you can create all of your and get access to all of your data for any of your Power Platform apps using those virtual entities. So you don't have to actually worry about it. So if we go to the next one, what we wanted to do is really put on a slide what the difference is when it comes to having data, using any of the different methods and mechanisms to be able to get that data across for any apps that you want to build. There is a standard connector, and that's been around for quite a while.
It's really easy for citizens, so to say, or non-techies.
Yeah, Julia loves
it. I love it. I do.
So yeah, you can use the connector, and all I would say about it is sometimes you're limited on your triggers and your actions that you can use in the connector. But
there's also legality restrictions too. You'll probably come across those problems. It's fantastic if you are one person who impacts one legal entity.
Yeah.
Or if you're demonstrating.
Yeah. So and these are the things, right? The connector's not perfect, and to be honest, the focus from a Microsoft investment perspective is actually on dual write and the virtual entities. So the connector is there, it will stay. It's going to be helping, like Julie said, those citizen developers get data in and out of their applications and using that. But realistically, that is where also the business events come in, where you can create additional actions, create additional triggers that you can use for all of your apps that you want to build, especially in these scenarios where you've got more complex requirements, either from the business or from an industry perspective, to give you that flexibility. Virtual entities, absolutely, this is sort of new and upcoming. You can do all CRUD applications. And it's the next best thing without having to get too deep into the common data service, without having to take your data out of your finance and operations application to use it. Because obviously, even with dual write and the data integration, there's going to be a little bit of lag with that data refresh interval. And you've got to then, like I said, have to think a bit more about your API limits and restrictions within the common data service. Data integrator, if you're a customer, like I said, as of today, if they're already using it, use it. If it comes to the fact of a new customer, you're going down this journey, don't use it. Use dual write. It's heavy investment. Most of the entities now can be as standard, used and accessed and pushed to CDS across HR, finance, supply chain and commerce. And what you also really need to know and be prepared for is when you're setting this up, keep an eye on when we release new packages and new versions, because if you are actually missing some entities, I guarantee you, I see now probably on, a twice weekly basis that we're releasing new versions of the solution package that you have to apply in the Power Platform Admin Center, which then enhances and increases the entities and also restructures them. So a little bit like when we first started with data entities and finance operations, what we've got free versions of the customer entity. As Microsoft, we're going and we're moving to a place where ultimately you will have that data in the common data service without anyone having to be too technical, to be honest, to set it up. I've shown loads of people how to set up dual write. And once you've done it the first time, you're golden. You can then go and continue to do it again.
Yeah. It is fun to use. It is very much fun to use. I will admit to that as well. So once we have our data within CDS, or we know how we're going to access our data, either from within the finance sort of side or a third-party tool, we then need to figure out what tool we're going to use to interact with it. We have Canvas apps. We've seen Canvas apps. We've shown you Canvas apps throughout the time, and then the what you see is what you get sort of application. Fantastic, really fun as a citizen tool to use, because they're just a bit of fun, to be honest with you. You control absolutely everything, which again makes figuring out what went wrong quite hard. And that leads us to model-driven apps. So model-driven apps are a lot more controlled and restricted into what you can kind of set up. And I'm saying this as a Canvas app person. A model app-driven app person is going to say the exact opposite. But the model-driven app works as off CDS entities, of the virtual entities as well. And you can control what the views are. You can control what the forms are. And they're a lot easier to figure out where you've done different developments and changes to. We also have the portal option, which Orion, sorry, mate, I'm so sorry. One day we're going to have a call just to teach me how to say your name, has fantastically demoed in the past. They're really useful if your user is not within your tenant. So if you do have people that need to come outside or access the information, view the information or update the information from outside of your tenant, such as a customer or a supplier, they're really useful to use as well. We also have the ability to embed apps into teams. So we can always embed an app into a team so they can be used. I know for us at my company, the app that we embedded in was the COVID checker, so that anyone could within their team access that app. And that was really quite useful for us. I'm just trying to see if I don't have that app anymore. But also what is a lot of fun is the embedding. I'm just going to open it up here. Is using bots, and bots for finance and operations, the whole purpose that we really have at the moment. Here we go. It's kind of like as alluded to before, it's a trigger for flow. It's a way to interact with your flow. So, what we can do within this, we trigger off our little bot within flow. And if people are most likely to be using and interacting within teams, let them stay in teams. Don't make them go out into a different system if we don't have to. And so what we're doing here is we can inquire. I'm building upon this. So every time I get a new idea, I'm just chucking in a new little control, and we can then start to create things. And so you can have this sort of natural conversation. You can then, you can guide the user down best practice. So rather, it's also kind of like a little bit like a task recorder on steroids in that situation. So we're getting all of this information. And we're guiding the user on, this is what I want you to do. This is the path that I want you to take. And that's the really cool thing about Power Virtual Agents, is that we can take that information, we can guide that sort of baseline conversation. And so what it's doing now is it's then going to create for me my purchase requisition for around 500K, but that's a very expensive training course. So That's what happens when you're not paying attention to what you're saying. And it's then created my purchase requisition. It's given me the link to go and view that purchase requisition as well. So we're trying to keep the system and the environment where the user is familiar and where the user is comfortable. So thinking about how they can, so we can embed into teams. We can also embed it within finance and operations. You guys have seen that. I've shown you that as we did the little demos before. It's really quite fun. If the user is always in finance, let them stay in finance, in my opinion. That's the power of it. And then we also have the ability to embed apps within BI. So here we have, I apologize for anyone that's BI focused here. I'm not a BI person, but we have the ability to have our lovely little BI dashboards and have apps embedded within it. So within here, I can, let me just click on different things and the wonderful thing about here is as you click through BI, our list changes. So I can then filter on purchase orders that have been invoiced. And again, my list changes. I don't want to focus on that, but in this app, what it's designed to do is allow users to filter down any sort of old purchase orders for any sort of reason, and then send them through an approval so we can get them cancelled out. So this is a way that we have a lovely little BI graph and we can start to manipulate that data. Feeding it into the Canvas app, we're feeding all this information. It's being sent. So when you set up the Power App, you tell it what fields you want, and that's the fields that it sends into your Canvas app, and you can then amend them, you can email them, you can use flows to trigger from them or from within there. It's a really nice way of interacting. If the user is the one, they're always in a Power BI report. Rightio. So when it comes to building a proof of concept, this is always the first step to getting your app made officially, to getting your business on board. So here are some tips that I've found over the time. Before you start to do your proof of concept, when you have your idea, time how long it takes you to complete the task manually. Because you're going to need to build a business case, especially if your business isn't fully on board with Power Platform yet. Time how long it's going to take you to complete manually so you have that record of information. Also, give yourself a time limit, because I found that with Power Platform, you can get lost for days. Or you get like this. It's very much like a drug when you first start playing with Power Platform, and you can just kind of just get lost, and you build upon and you build upon and you build upon, and before you know it, you don't have a deadline. So always give yourself a deadline whenever you start building your proof of concepts. Keep your first proof of concept cycle simple. Prioritize the requirements. If you have to, list them all out and say, okay, well, this is the first level, second level, third level. Do it in the way. You don't have to Moscow it. You can just do it in a ranking that you need to in order to keep it, get your first little proof of concept on. Get everyone excited about using the Power Platform and excited about the process. And then from there, you can then start adding in all your little extra bits and bobs. If you are going to start using this and sharing this amongst your team or amongst your company, get someone technical to review it. That's one of the biggest things for me as a functional person, is that when I get a technical person to review the work, often they will streamline it, they make it smarter, they make it faster, they just make it a better process in general. Business policies and rules. So you need to figure out, does your company have any business and policies and rules? Now, if your business is new to the Power Platform, they may not have any, but they definitely should. We have our next slide, where Kaila is going to talk all about governance as well. And licensing as well. You do need to make sure that you do have the right licenses to do it. The AI model builder stuff is amazing and fantastic, but it also does have a separate license to the Power Platform. So that can often be a bit of a kick in the pants when it comes to building the Power Platform. And that's why, again, taking note of the time that it takes you to complete the task, both before and afterwards, is really going to help you with your proof of concept and, if supporting the argument for the licensing. My next slide is actually about sharing it. So let's talk about sharing the app. So you have the wonderful app. We are going to talk about licensing in a moment. And Kaila, you can jump in. We'll have just a general conversation about this one. So we have our lovely app. It's fantastic. We're happy. We now need to share. It's been technical reviewed. We're good to go. We need to share it. So here are the things that I need to think about when you want to share an app. Oh, I hope my app. Okay. Sharing the app itself is simple. you click on share. There's even flows out there where you can even create your own flow. I've got a link in the useful link section on how to share apps automatically. It's really fun to use. It's really easy to share as well. As long as it's within your tenant, it's pretty much easy to share. The data is the next part. So just because you share the app doesn't mean you've shared the data. A lot of the times I've accidentally shared an app with a person and I've forgotten to share the data that either the data that comes in Excel, or maybe it's in SharePoint, or maybe it's in Finance, but the user themselves don't have access to that environment or the Excel file. Then they can't. It kind of falls over if you don't share the data as well. So again, try to link the two together, and often the times you can with Canvas apps, at least within model-driven apps, there's a whole bunch of functionality. So be aware of those too. And then finally, there's another one as well, sharing the personalization. Now, this is the part where I think that finance and operations really, really does lack, because every time you build an app and you embed an app and you interact with that app, that's a personalization that you have done. And this is really good. Okay, so that's fine, but and sharing on bulk is really easy as well. So you can share amongst security roles, you can share amongst to everyone. Sharing personalizations in bulk is easy. It's the ongoing process. So when you get a newcomer into your business, it's remembering you have to share the app, you have to share the data, you have to create the user within finance and operations, and you have to share the personalizations. The first three can be automated. At the moment, personalizations can't be. So it's something to be aware of. It is a bit of a manual, bit of a pain in the bum. And also, licensing it. Make sure you have the right licenses. Kaila is very much for read your license guide, interact with your license guide, know your license guide, know what you have access to as well. So that's important. Make sure you license your app. So we've got the app share. We just need to now talk about governance. So over to you, my darling.
Yeah. You make me sound so exciting with all these conversations about licensing.
Oh, you do licensing, I do debits and credits. Between the two of us, we're the life of the party.
So this is more about, to be honest, what often goes most wrong when it comes to Power Platform, and especially with the original messaging, even on that Microsoft used to do about this being a citizen developer tool. A lot of this actually got missed. So if you're going and talking to people and you want them to have access to the Power Platform, they should, and it's all great, and they're building all these really cool apps, but actually very quickly you end up with some technical debt, because it doesn't mean, like Julia said, the app's necessarily performant, and they might actually become part of an ingrained business process that's not then suddenly managed by IT. It's not known and understood by IT. So you've got then different processes going in that have outside your standard process cycle that hasn't been managed. So first things first, center of excellence. Really, really important. This is something that all companies that want to enable their business to build apps, which you all should want to, build in a center of excellence. It means you can monitor the apps that your company are building. You can monitor actually whether they're being used or not. So you can track if something's becoming a high critical app that suddenly is going to be, if it's unavailable, someone's going to do a P1 to IT and saying, oh, I can't create a purchase order anymore. And you're sitting there thinking, well, system's fine. Well, no, I'm using this app. This app doesn't work. Well, okay, now that's become important. And a roadmap. Because when you have these apps that become ingrained in a business process, that should then be centralized within your center of excellence. You might want to enhance it. You need to make sure when you're doing updates and upgrades to your applications and changing or expanding your business, well, now suddenly that app needs to be reviewed. You need a roadmap as part of it. You might want to enhance the functionality. Policies, data security and segregation of duty. Your role-based access control in finance, supply chain and commerce does not limit your access to data in the common data service. It does not. They're not linked. They're not the same, completely different roles and security. I don't think I've said it enough. They are not the same. You need to, for your business users, make sure you are securing the data that you have put in the common data service. Think GDPR, okay? You've decided that you want your customers and your purchase orders in it. Absolutely great, fine, brilliant. Well, suddenly, if you haven't secured that, your whole business can see that data. you know, you need to make sure that you're putting the segregation of duties and your data security in the common data service to make sure people can only access the data that they're expected to be able to access with their normal business role. ALM, it's a bit like we said, change control, making sure you know which applications you've got, making sure people aren't just building applications, to be honest, that are a bit naff. Making sure you have that control within your business teams and your centre of excellence, they work together. And ITSM, how do you grant people access to do this? How do they go about it? How can you then share it, manage it out, and making sure you have full incident management when it comes to keeping these apps up and running? So I don't know, have you got anything to add to that one, Gina?
No, that's all amazing. Finishing up, there are some links. We've got some links out here. I'm assuming that we'll be sending the slide deck around. So if any of you guys want to learn more about it, very much Aurelian said before, the Power Platform Microsoft course, definitely sign up to all of that. But all of these blogs that we've mentioned here are very much Power Platform D365 enthusiasts. So you can click on any of them and they're going to show you through, and they're going to often do pretty active. There's also some YouTube channels that you can pay attention to as well. So that leads us to the end. Thank you very much. Any questions? If they're licensing, I'll refer to Kaila.
So just because we keep mentioning it, and I will say this to you guys. So within finance, supply chain and commerce, if you know or don't know, there's 3 types of license: full users, activity, and team member. When it comes to Power Platform, activity and team member are the same. And what you need to be careful of when you're thinking of your gap analysis and your design is that at the moment, model-driven apps cannot be provided to someone who is licensed as a team member or activity user. So if you are designing a process that is supposed to extend functionality that you're pushing to a team member user or an activity user, it has to be a Canvas app because of technical limitations on the fact that users of those licenses can't open custom apps. They can only open finance, supply chain, commerce. And that means they can only access any Power Platform extensions that have been embedded within finance and operations. It's an issue that the product group are aware of. It's an issue that I'm working through with them to try and make sure that also for team member users, we can start providing that functionality. But at the moment, as of today, be really careful to make sure you're looking at the ultimate user base and the license they're going to have. Because if you do have those gaps and you want to still provide them a model-driven app so you could have that more complex functionality, you will have to either license the app or the users for now. So yeah, fun. I love the licensing guys.
Yay! Keeps you busy on your toes.
Too busy.